All right, I'm cutting this on a Wednesday morning. It is February 27th. 2 days left in meteorological winter, which starts December 1st and ends February 28th. If you hear a little bit of reverberation in the background, it's because I'm driving to work and I'm on the go, but I thought it'd be fitting to actually cut this particular weather pod, this weather episode, while I'm on the go because, as you know, storm chasing is a big part of how I would describe my weather hobby. You know, I chase for the National Weather Service, and I chase in the winter, chase in the spring. All modes of severe weather I'm drawn to, and so there, each year there's a lot of miles logged. And this winter I've logged quite a bit of miles compared to last winter. The number one reason, don't have a newborn around the house, and I was pretty grounded last year. But this year, with Everly being one now, and but also just the nature of the winter itself, the general pattern at large, which has favored I-44 in areas of the western Ohio Valley. If we're talking about our regional cul-de-sac, east of the Continental Divide, and getting close to the Mississippi River, forget the fact that, yes, this weather pattern has been lights out for the Northwest the past month, when it was supposed to be originally, this month was supposed to be the golden ticket for the Southeast, Mid-Atlantic, Eastern Seaboard, etc. The reason why I'm cutting this is because I want to talk about what went wrong in a winter that had so much hype attached, and I'll be the first to admit I bought into the hype. I think a lot of people did. In fact, a lot of professionals, they can't pinpoint one guy who said, "Oh yeah, by the way, it's going to be another warm winter." I couldn't find a single warm forecast, and I, looked at like 50. I'll say at least 50 amateur to professional winter weather forecasts going back to last fall between September and November. I issued mine late October because I wanted to see how everything was unfolding, so I delayed my winter weather forecast last year, and I'll be straight up honest, it may be my last winter weather forecast I ever issue. Actually, it sounds weird saying that. I may take a break next year. We'll just play it by ear. But I'll be just straight up honest with you guys. I am so jaded. It's not that I don't like being wrong. I can admit my mistakes. But I just think that part of the letdown has to do with this social media age we're in, and you're hearing so much input from year to year, just a lot of big names saying this is why this winter could be a big deal, and you're getting all these takes and all these angles, and you put them all together, and you're putting them in this mental pot, and you're stirring in like, how could this winter not be a bust? And there's a lot of lessons that I've learned, a lot of takeaways, I think more so this year in the last 3 months than any other. And I wanted to share some with you guys on this cloudy, chilly February morning. By the way, before I forget, it's worth noting that there actually is a non-zero wintry precip shot for this Sunday, but I almost don't care about it to the point where I'm going to mention it or do a bit. If it looks like, if we're within 24 hours and it's looking like, okay, all the models are pointing to this being a hit, there's not a what could go wrong scenario, I might do a briefing on the thread come Saturday. But it's Wednesday, and I still got 3 days in my mind before I really go for the dangled carrot. So I know, I guess the best place to start, this is my first lesson. I conceptually understood it in years past, but I get it all the more now, and that is you have to look at what could go wrong when making any type of forecast. You have to, as far as what you're predicting, you have to look at the other side and really, you got to spend more time focusing on what could go wrong than what could go right. And again, you might be thinking what could go right is the sunny day, the calm day, the non-severe day. No, I'm talking about any forecast you make, whether you're predicting a non-eventful, mild summer afternoon to just a historic severe weather outbreak or winter weather outbreak. You have to look at what could compromise my forecast. Is there any solution, even if it's an outlier? Is there anything valid about a particular solution that says, oh, by the way, this actually couldn't happen? That this may not end up verifying for this reason. So knowing your model biases from the European, which is still the king and the best verified model out there, to your American solutions, i.e. the GFS is the most popular one, the NAM is probably the second. Even your short-term range, the RAP and the HRR, just to name a few. You got UK Met, you got a lot of, the Canadian secondary models that you do have to often blend them. But yeah, just even more so, what could go wrong? And that also pertains to season long. There were a few season long that we all thought, was smoking crack back, in the fall. Like, this is not going to be a blowtorch. And perhaps there was some recency bias involved. 2016, 2017 was a warm winter, very warm. 2017, 2018 was not as warm, but we had a pretty good cold stretch late December, early January. But around that, February was a blowtorch last year, in 2018. The one before that was the super El Nino, and if it weren't, it would be one of the biggest blowtorch winters on record. The one saving grace of it all was Winter Storm Jonas, which brought 8 to 10 plus inches for Metro Nashville. It was a once in a generation type snow event, and it bailed out that winter. I've posted actually one of my first briefings on the Flash Weather page had to do with just how unique that winter 2015-16 was. We had plus 15 anomalies in December of 15, but we turned around and went below average in January, which is just insane. And what's often missed is there was a decent snow event just a few weeks after Jonas. So we actually had a pretty solid 2-3 week window in a super El Nino winter that we haven't had in a weak El Nino winter. And that brings me to my second point. So you hear me say La Nina and El Nino often. Those pertain to ENSO. I think it's often the number one place that meteorologists start when they're trying to assess what a winter's going to bring. Are we in a La Nina pattern, El Nino pattern? And it all has to do with the direction of the trade winds, the direction, strength of the trade winds along the equatorial Pacific. And you're looking for areas, what parts of the Pacific, western, central, eastern, are above average. Where's the upwelling, the downwelling occurring? Where's the tropical convection occurring? Is it over near Indonesia, or is it, is it on the eastern side of things? And eastern can be like off the coast of Peru. It could be a little bit off the coast. There's not a one-size-fits-all El Nino. Generally, we categorize it in 6 categories: weak, moderate, strong El Nino, and weak, moderate, strong La Nina. But even those have unique variations. You have a Molokai La Nina and El Nino. A Molokai means that your greatest anomalies are concentrated right smack dab in the central Pacific, whether it's positive anomalies, temperature anomalies, and by that I mean sea surface temperatures, positive sea surface temperature anomalies, or negative sea surface temperatures anomalies. That's not usually the number one place to start. And in this case, we had it would look like a Molokai El Nino, a weak El Nino forming, maybe weak to moderate, going back to 4 or 5 months ago. That was the popular forecast. It certainly looked like that was going to take hold. And if you're just isolating ENSO, that verifies well for Middle Tennessee, like 60-70% of the time. I can't remember offhand, but if you were to take that percentage, it would equate to a likely opportunity. I've mentioned before, like if you see whether it's a weather app or a weather authority or channel, you have 60% starting there. That constitutes likely odds. Above 50%, you're outside the chance and into the likely category. There's a likely chance that if you just isolate ENSO in a vacuum, this winter was going to be a smash, really. El Nino in general, regardless of the outcome, you're some part of the East is going to have a below average year in terms of temperature, and the thought is if you can get a below average winter in terms of temperature, you're in good shape for whenever you got to short wave moving in, and if you could marry just a little bit of precip with that, even in a below average precip year, you can get some good snow opportunities. Whatever the case, we haven't had a good. We haven't had a decent window at all. We haven't had a 2-3 week window like we've had in previous years where, all right, let's capitalize on this. We might have had a 2-week window in January, but I just think that it was compromised by a number of different factors, and it's somewhat related to why some towns, some major cities like Boston and the Northeast have had such a terrible winter, like an historically bad winter when it comes to snowfall. All these things are related, and so I suppose my next point is the verdict is still out. The weather community is still investigating all the criteria that have busted so many winter weather forecasts this year, and some of it is actually kind of complicated. I will try to do my best to explain it here in just a second, but I guess this is kind of a hybrid point because it's my approach to winter weather forecasting that I'm most upset about. From a personal perspective, I would be upset either way, whether my forecast was on point or wasn't on point. You never want to be right. If you're a winter weather enthusiast like me, you never want to be right in a call that, this winter is going to be mild and just bland, really. A lot of times we will we approach the teleconnection criteria in check down format, like a checklist. We just go down the list and being like, well, where's the ENSO at? La Nina or El Nino. The PDO, where we are in that, is it negative or positive? A lot of these teleconnections have a negative or positive phase, and a lot of them have to do with sea surface temperature anomalies. You look at, the AMO, which is on the Atlantic Ocean side. There's new teleconnections emerging. The angular momentum is one of them. I forget, it's angular momentum something. I can't remember the other M or the other A. Maybe it's Atlantic angular momentum. Some are pretty fresh, and I'm still trying to get the hang of. You got NAO, AO, PNA. Some of you have heard the AO sides before. Arctic Oscillation. NAO is the North Atlantic Oscillation. And so anyway, we just go down the list, and we're trying to see how everything. We make a case like, is this favorable, non-favorable, or is this neutral? I've done that for years, and I'm thinking maybe that's not the best way to go about it. I don't think it's necessarily a wrong way to go about it, but you also have to filter all of that through the fact that there's a pecking order when it comes to weather teleconnections. It really is a complicated game of chess, not checkers. For instance, I mentioned earlier the number one place I go when I'm making a winter weather forecast is ENSO. La Nina or El Nino. But there's there are trump cards that the atmosphere gives us, that Mother Nature has up her sleeve. They're trump cards. And a lot of it has to do with physics and the part of meteorology that is can be a little overwhelming for those who might just like what happens at the ground level, as opposed to the huge sea of unseen. You're talking about the stratosphere and the troposphere. We're talking about Rossby waves and all the different type of cells that pertain to not just the vertical circulation at what latitude. So there's you have to look at these circulation patterns up in the stratosphere and troposphere at different latitudes and longitudes. It's not just a function of sea surface temperature anomalies, which for me, I've often put so much emphasis on that. But you also have to look at where's the convection being stubborn. Like, is there just is there an area along the Pacific or Indian Ocean, or where are the waves getting held up? Is there anything are there any patterns that would compromise? And so in this case, an El Nino was predicted by every major outlet, and if you're taking the Pacific Ocean by itself, an El Nino seemed likely. But there were certain elements over on the other side of the globe that were way more on the La Nina side. You had La Nina type stuff going on with as far as tropical convection, thunderstorm development, where the heavy rains were. What happens on the other side of the planet really matters. And this is what I'm still learning, but somehow, like when it comes to these short waves, these Rossby Kelvin waves, and how they interact with these type of circulation cells, I blank on all the names. This is part of meteorology that I didn't really get heavily involved with during my studies back in the day. You know, we didn't quite make it this far in my academic progression. I've had to self-learn all this stuff and actually learn from actual professionals off weather forums and threads, and I do read this stuff. And I understand the maps graphically, but it's hard to put them into words. All I could say is when I talk about convection, I'm talking about thunderstorm development, which usually yields to positive precip anomalies. And the best way I could say it is this was a compromised ENSO, because if we're just talking about sea surface temperature anomalies, El Nino looked like it was going to happen, but it was almost offset by La Nina convection patterns in the Western Pacific, and those had implications when you get to the poles, North Pole in particular, where your polar vortex is located. It got to the point where the tropical convection ended up having an adverse effect on how the polar vortex impacted our weather, because we eventually had a stratospheric warming event late December, which was actually it's a good time to have it if you want winter weather to verify. And we actually had the polar vortex flirt with the U.S.-Canadian border sometime in late January. It brought really cold temperatures to much of the Great Lakes, but and as we experienced, we were we got brushed by that cold air, which is probably a good thing, because that type of cold air is no fun, even with snow around. We've been brushed by a lot of the cold air masses this year. They just haven't been able to sink far south, and that's partly because we, again, have struggled with Atlantic blocking. The NAO has been positive once again. It's hard to get the Atlantic Ocean side to compromise. In previous winters, 14-15, we got the teleconnections off the west coast were favorable, so it pushed up the ridging on the western seaboard, and we got cold air delivered that way. But just the angle to which the cold air is, how do I say it? As far as cold air making it this far south, the mid-south, the angle has been way too shallow most of the year, which is why Missouri and southern Illinois, Indiana, western Kentucky have had a better time capitalizing, and kind of why western Tennessee, got a nice hit back in November. Speaking of November, it looks like the way this winter / the months adjacent to winter, so we're going back to November 1st, and we're going to broaden out to the end of March. It looks like November and March will end up as negative. We'll have negative temperature anomalies, so below average temperatures. And then the core of winter, your meteorological winter months, so December, January, and February will all be positive. Just crazy stuff in a year where I honestly thought 4 or 5 months ago we would be negative, almost negative start to finish. I thought December would be the worst month, February would be the best month. And that's typically how El Nino winters go. But it's almost like this year was its own analog in a lot of ways. It's easy to rely on analogs. And you just kind of have to not rely on the past so much. It's good to be like, oh, if you take a blend of these years, this happened. It's not wrong to do that, but we can't rely on that for one weather forecast. You kind of just have to reset each year as if it's one of a kind, and just look for, in the same way you look for what could go wrong in an individual short-term forecast, you got to look at what could what makes the setup stand out and unique to anything that we've seen before from a extended forecasting perspective. So yeah, there's just a lot on my mind, and a lot of this might sound like voodoo to you, the listener, and if so, I apologize. Man, I am not getting good. Sorry, I'm cutting this on the go, and I'm reaping one of the consequences. The traffic is been a real bear today. So thank you for letting me cut this on the go. I think for the most part, I've done a good job not being disturbed by just the crazy ebb and flows that come with the commuter traffic, which has gotten progressively worse. Okay, back to the weather. I do apologize. While it's certainly not a character issue, I was, as far as my inaccuracy in my my last winter weather forecast, I've never been more wrong before. As a weather community, I think a lot of people are having to eat crow. And I know that for a lot of you, it's like, well, just some winters are going to bust, and that's part of it. Yes, that's true. But this would be the third straight bust after a pretty good smash in 2016, and that's beginning to, the joy associated with that memory is beginning to fade because we haven't had anything remotely close to that. And yes, I chase to see appreciable snow. I have at least 2 of the last 3 years, and I think even just the chasing has been wearing down on me, and just it's proven exhausting. I've had to do 2 overnight stays. One of them was not planned. Would I rather watch snowfall in my backyard and get to enjoy it with my family and kids? Absolutely. I'm very dissatisfied with how this winter has verified, and I'm nervous about it being a sign of things to come. It's just really hard to score snow in Nashville, and I just wish that Nashville was a northern town. If you take Nashville and you put it at Louisville or Indianapolis latitudes, I think it's a different story, and I'd be much more content with the climate. But alas, there's nothing we can do changing where Nashville is placed on the national map, and so you live and learn as you go along. So in case that last point was a little bit murky, you kind of have to know not only teleconnections, but what trumps the other. So it's like you may have favorable signals here, and here, but if this is going on, if this issue tied to the MJO, the mad juicylation oscillation, or I forget what the J stands for sometimes. It's the MJO. I know what it talks about. It's all about what's going on, what your waves of convection going on in the Indian Ocean, how is it propagating eastward. If things are getting held up on the other side of the planet, it doesn't really matter. Signals like the ENSO and the PNA, it's like there's a lot of cause and effect, but it's like a 3D version of it. You might it's kind of like within a severe weather episode, you might have, say, 5 parameters you're looking at, and 2 through 5 are just off the charts. But if the first one doesn't get off the ground, the other parameters are moot. They're nullified. One of the biggest disappointments last year was the July 20th severe weather outbreak, and we couldn't get the lift necessary to generate these storms. But if you got the lift, hypothetically, the storms would explode because everything from in the mid and upper levels were just dynamite that day, and we just couldn't get the low levels to cooperate. So we were bailed out of a pretty bad, but potentially bad severe weather episode in Middle Tennessee. And if you apply it to this winter, it's kind of like we've had some really, we've had a lot of good signals. I think we had more favorable signals than negative signals. But the Trump cards were greater than ever this year. Couldn't get those signals to cooperate. And as a result, we've had shorter windows of periods and colder than average weeks. We might have had like 1 or 2 colder than average weeks. So, of course, all it takes is one good storm to make the difference, as we saw with Jonas 3 years ago. If we can get, say, this weekend storm to overachieve, which is not out of the woods yet, all will be forgotten. But just being completely honest with you, the listener, if we don't get any more snow, maybe less than an inch the rest of the way, this would be a top 3 disappointing winter of all time for me in my over 25 years living in Tennessee. 2013, 2014 was still the most disappointing, and it might forever be that, just because we were so close to a lot of big hits, and it just kept going south of us, and south and east of us, and it was just really hard to get shut out, and in storms that Knoxville and Chattanooga were getting. So we were so close, and we haven't been that as close this year. It's easier to accept areas north and west of you getting good snows, and but when Birmingham and Huntsville, Atlanta, they're getting more snow than you. That's tough to swallow. We had that version this year came in the December 9th storm, and that was a North Carolina hit, brought to you by cold air damming and how Carolina can score when Tennessee doesn't score or can't score. 13-14 was the most disappointing winter. 11-12 was mild and pretty disappointing wall to wall, but that, I think the writing was on the wall that year, and we had a nice early start November and the first half of December. But to me, it was really sucky for a lot of areas. So because we weren't alone in that, and because that pattern would yield a nice severe weather season the following year, it's kind of like I could have grace for 2011, 2012. 04, 05, first year in college, I wasn't as into weather yet. We didn't get any measurable snow in Nashville, and I had just started to really pay attention, becoming more winter weather aware, and had very little idea as far as how all these teleconnections work together. And so I was just kind of distracted by being a freshman in college and all the life changes going on. So 04, 05 wasn't that, it was disappointing on paper, but didn't have as much emotional investment at the time. I'd say that the way this winter has gone, it would go to number 2 on the most disappointing winter list, maybe 3, but it's going to be one of those 2 if something doesn't change here. 16-17, the writing was on the wall that year. We actually, I think we got a hit January 6th, and we got about almost 2 inches in Spring Hill. And then in Keaton Springs, where I happened to be, I got a 3-inch hit in mid-March. So as far as where I was when winter weather hit, got 5 inches of snow as far as what I experienced, even in a bad winter 16-17. This winter, we experienced 2 in my backyard, which is more than some. Some haven't seen any snow this year. South Central, kind of southeastern portions of Middle Tennessee, haven't seen anything. Not a flake. So even our 2 inches in White Bluff this year, it could be worse. So as bad as 16-17 was, because the writing was on the wall, we were still kind of in the wake of a Super El Nino and all the signals, where the waters were on both sides of the country. This was again, social media, the hype train was going so quickly, it was hard to avoid it and get out of its way. And I think next year, if I make a winter weather forecast, I'm going to be way more cautious and not nearly as bullish. So anyway, that wraps up things today. I hope some of this made sense to you, and apologies. I thought it'd be fitting to capture this on the go. It's 6:42 as I wrap this up. My mind is full already. I think I was fairly coherent, just given the fact I woke up shortly, not that long ago, and had a 4-hour night the previous night with a sick child, and there's a lot compromising my energy levels right now. But I think I was able to sound at least somewhat intelligible. So Appreciate you guys listening if you made it this far. If you didn't make it this far, obviously, no offense.